Hello, my name is Tom Palmer and I am a children's author and I write books like these. The one thing these three books have got in common is that they're all set in the First World War. And this is a short video where I'm going to talk about First World War stories, but not just by me, sort of First World War stories by other authors as well. And the reason I'm doing it is because I really think that it's very hard for us, 100 years after the First World War, to be able to sort of comprehend what it was like to be in the First World War. We can watch films, we can listen to recordings of people talking about it, we can do lots of things, but I think the only way, for me, the only way you can really, I suppose, try to empathise with the soldiers who are involved is by reading fiction like this, and like this. So, the first book, I'm going to talk about some books by other authors, and then I'm going to talk about mine briefly. This is the first book I want to talk about. And before I do that, I'm going to stop my dog from eating that plastic bottle that he's eating, so if you'll just excuse me. There you go, good boy. There you go. Anyway, so, this book is called War Game, and this is by Michael Foreman. And I think this is good because it's a story, but it's also a picture book. So it's got lots of excellent images in it that just help us come to terms with what it might have been like in the First World War. But also it's a story about quite a well-known thing that did happen in the First World War, and probably by looking at the photograph on that, the picture on the cover, you can see that this is about the football game that was played, if you've not heard of it, between the British and the German soldiers on the first Christmas of the First World War. They stopped fighting, came out of the trenches on either side, so they were dug in holes either side, and they came out, they exchanged gifts, and they played a game of football. And it's a really good example of how these were just normal young men. They were young, like some of them were like 18, perhaps even younger, and they were there being shot at and shooting and bombing and being bombed, and they didn't want to be there. They wanted to be with their families at Christmas, but they managed to find a way of coming together with each other, which is, it's bizarre that people were shooting each other one day and the next day they were playing football against each other. And shaking hands and exchanging gifts. But that's why this is such a good story. And it's told beautifully because it's by Michael Foreman, but also as well as pictures, it has sort of facsimiles or examples of the sort of posters and images that people would have seen during the First World War. And that just helps us come to terms with what it may have been like. So this is my first recommendation, War Game by Michael Foreman. My next example is a very well-known book as well by a friend of Michael Foreman's, Michael Morpurgo. Now this book, War Horse, is probably the most famous children's book about the First World War, and I like this because it's told by a horse. It's told from the point of view of a horse, and the horse meets various people involved in the war on both sides. And I suppose it's trying to comprehend what is happening to it. In the war, and to all the people involved in the war as well, and that's why I like it, because it's not a human's point of view. It's not got humans saying this is why we have to shoot at Germans and this is why the Germans have to shoot at us, but it's a horse's point of view as to what on earth is going on. And for us, like, why did millions of men fight in the First World War? Why did hundreds of thousands die in the First World War? And this story is a way of us seeing it. And it's a story, it's a way of us seeing it from the point of view of someone who's not a soldier, but someone who's very closely involved and on both sides, which is why I think it's such a clever story, and obviously why it sold so many copies and had a film made of it and a play made of it. And this is, I suppose, this book's probably sort of 5+ for children 5 years old and older, and this one maybe 8+, although you might disagree with me. That's roughly what I would say. The final First World War book that I wanted to show you was this one that I'm actually reading now. It's called Charlie's War. This is actually a 3-volume, massive comic about the First World War. And although it's a comic and comics are meant to be funny, this isn't really that funny. it is a story of the First World War told in comic book form. And so comic books are it's a kind of a bit like watching a film, a comic, isn't it? Because you're reading, but you're kind of looking at images, then the next image, then the next image. And it's a different way of finding out about the characters who are in the story. And I like it because you see the expressions on their faces, you see the death and destruction around them, which is why I probably wouldn't give this to anyone who's under 9 years old. But I think because it's a comic book, it's an interesting way of trying to understand what happened in the First World War. And in parts it's quite graphic, which means you see the unpleasantness of war, you see wounds, and you see some slightly or more distressing images. But that's what the First World War was like. It was a terrible, terrible dark time. And this comic book, even though it's a comic, does a really good job of making you want to know more and to really empathise with the characters, which means sort of try to understand how they were feeling. Anyway, they're the books by other authors, but I should show you some by me. This is Over the Line, which is about footballers who fought in the First World War, real footballers. This is Wings, Flyboy, and it's called, it's about a young boy from today, a Sikh from today, who goes to fight in the First World War. He goes back in time. And he becomes a pilot in the First World War. And it's kind of a way like a child from today is trying to understand what it was like. And I think time travel is quite a good way of doing that. Placing a child from today to go back in time to fight in the First World War as a pilot, being shot at above the trenches while flying an aeroplane, and he's a young Sikh boy in that story. Finally, this is Armistice Runner. An Armistice Runner is a story about a girl from today who's a runner, who finds out that her great-great-grandfather was a trench runner in the First World War. And a trench runner was someone who had to run messages, remember something, and then take the message and take it to another officer in the army so that the army could understand what everybody else was doing. And runners were used. If there was no telephone lines or radio to use, someone was sent running. And Lily finds out about her great-great-grandfather through reading his letters in this book. So they're my three First World War books. I suppose I am fascinated in the First World War. I suppose if you ask me why, I wouldn't be quite so sure why I am so fascinated in the First World War. But I think for me, the reason I like writing books like this and like also reading books like this is that the First World War was such a terrible thing. 4 years of men and women trying to kill each other with millions and millions of bullets and bombs and other weapons. Stories like this help me see it from one person's point of view, or one animal's, a horse's point of view, or a young footballer's point of view, or a soldier's point of view. I suppose stories help us into that and help us understand things about our past. And one of the most important things for me about understanding our past is that we've got to understand things that went wrong in the past. The First World War was something that went wrong, and if we can understand how things went wrong, we can understand how not to make those mistakes again. And I think that's one of the important reasons that I read history books and that I want to know about history, so that we try not to make those mistakes again. Anyway, thank you for listening.